Daniel Camargo is known as one of the worst serial killers whose spree stretched from Colombia to Ecuador. He was active before Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes, began his killing spree, and the motive behind Daniel's killings would be equally disturbing when put into perspective. Daniel Camargo was born on January 2nd, 1930. He would be born into a well-off family that consisted of his father Daniel Camargo Briceño, his mother Teresa Barbosa, and his older half-sister, and they would live in a small town located in the Colombian Andes called Analema. Daniel's father was a successful businessman and focused on his career at the cost of a relationship with his son. This wasn't all bad since Daniel still had his mother to bond with, though that would all change when Camargo was 2 years old when his mother died. His father would waste no time in finding another woman by the name of Disocelina Fernandez and remarried shortly after. Regardless of his tragedy, growing up, Daniel would excel at school and is said to have had a relatively high IQ. But when he tried to bond with his father, he would be rebuffed and insulted by being told he would never amount to anything and that he's useless. A bit harsh to say the least, though maybe his stepmom would treat him differently, right? Not really. It turns out that his stepmother was worse than his father in causing Daniel misery. Considering that his father wasn't around much due to work, Daniel's stepmother would have a heavy influence over him. You see, Dioselina would obsess over the idea of having a daughter, which, in her case, was impossible due to issues of infertility. And in a sick, twisted way to deal with her own plight, she would channel her misery onto young Daniel. So, his stepmother would abuse him by whipping him with a bullwhip. She would go as far as forcing Daniel to wear women's clothing, almost as if subconsciously telling him she wished he was a girl. Or more accurately, literally rubbing in Daniel's face that I don't value as a boy, which would incite violent tendencies inside of Daniel. Because when you're continually humiliated, you'll develop a predisposition to a seething hate, and his internal rage would manifest itself when he would begin fighting at school. But his stepmother wouldn't react too fondly to his misbehaviors. So, to punish Daniel, she would take away his pants and force him to wear women's clothing. If that wasn't enough, to add salt to the already deepening wound, his sick stepmother would invite his friends over to join in on the humiliation of a young child, and was even said to have sent young Daniel to school wearing said clothes. Not only did this damage Daniel in the moment, destroying his self-esteem, but it ruined his reputation at school, which made it difficult for him to build meaningful relationships with his peers. Daniel would eventually develop a hatred for women, associating femininity with humiliation, and it would eventually fester to the point of no return. When Daniel turned 10 years old, his father would send him to a prestigious Catholic all-boys school. Keep in mind that Daniel excelled at his studies and was seen as a good student. He enjoyed studying because he was good at it, and it seemed that he had a promising future in front of him, though this would be short-lived since he would be pulled out of school and put to work as a means to support the family. This sudden change in lifestyle would be attributed to La Violencia, which was a 10-year civil war in Colombia which plunged the country into economic hardships. So Daniel would begin working in a door-to-door sales position, and it turns out that during his childhood, he had developed a knack for manipulating and lying to get the things he wanted. And in his current position, nothing was different. He wanted something from the people he would meet, money, and he would excel at persuading his clients to invite him into their homes and purchase from him, and Daniel would amass a steady income from his endeavors. It seemed that Daniel was intelligent enough to get what he wanted the right way, though getting things the right way would be replaced with depraved desires. During his time selling door to door, he would engage romantically with a client by the name of Alcrida Catillo, a young woman with 2 children from a previous relationship. Apparently, Daniel would court her rather quickly and convince her to live together shortly after they began dating, which would go on without a hitch until May 24th, 1958, when the expenses for sustaining their lifestyle became too overbearing for Daniel. And so, Daniel would resort to petty theft by robbing a shop belonging to one of his clients. But this wouldn't go unpunished, as he was arrested only a few hours later and sent to a minimum security prison. You reap what you sow, as the saying goes, but Daniel wouldn't be too fond to the idea of paying for his mistakes. So, at an opportune moment, Daniel would play the system and discreetly sneak out of jail, pretending to be a visitor and then walking out behind 2 off-duty officers, and then went home as if nothing ever happened. Daniel would continue his life trying to do things the right way so he wouldn't have to return to jail again. 4 years later, in 1962, he would meet another woman by the name of Esperanza, who he would fall in love with. He would want to marry Esperanza until it was revealed she wasn't a virgin. And apparently, he would also catch her in bed with another man. These string of events would deeply disturb Daniel and prompted him to propose a deal with Esperanza so they could rectify their relationship. Daniel would propose that Esperanza help him find virgin girls that he could have sex with, which in a disturbed turn of events, she would agree to. This would mark the beginning of a string of 5 abductions and rapes the couple would initiate. With Esperanza at the bait, she would lure young girls to their house and drug them with sleeping pills. Once they were out cold, Daniel would have his way with these poor girls and would eventually let them go when he was satisfied. This would go on until his 5th victim, after being taken advantage of, went to the authorities to report what happened, which prompted the authorities to locate Daniel and Esperanza and arrest them, sending them to separate jails. On April 10, 1964, Daniel would be initially sent to 3 years in prison, which he would be grateful for and swear to repent from his wicked ways. But as what goes around comes around, there would be a new judge assigned to his case and would rightfully increase his sentence to 8 years. This didn't sit well with Daniel, and his newfound desire to repent gave way to a rebellious hate, and he would plot how he could take his revenge on the world. He would serve his sentence in relative silence, and once he was released, he would begin prowling for new victims, and in 1973, in an attempt to live in Brazil, he would be arrested for lack of proper documentation and deported to Colombia. While in Colombia, he would take up work as a street vendor selling televisions, and his focus would shift to young girls in pedophilic fashion. One day he found an opportunity to kidnap a 9-year-old girl from school, and he proceeded to rape and kill her so she wouldn't be able to report him, which would mark his first murder in a string of killings. Between 1973 and 1974, it's speculated that during his time in Colombia, he would amass a victim count of at least 80, maybe more. During one abduction and murder, Daniel would leave one of his televisions abandoned near the body of his victim. In an attempt to have his cake and eat it too, he would return to the crime scene in an attempt to retrieve his merchandise, but was fortunately caught by police officers that were already investigating the murder and rape, which led to his arrest on May 3, 1974, in Barranquilla, Colombia. He would be subsequently charged with only 1 case of rape and murder of a 9-year-old girl, and was sentenced to 30 years in prison, which was later reduced to 25. And he would be sent to Gargona Prison, which is an island in Colombia that closely resembles the United States island of Alcatraz. While in prison, Daniel would fervently study marine navigation. Why would he decide on this learning path? Was he hoping for an opportunity to escape the island? Whatever the case, it would pay off for Daniel because 10 years into his sentence, in November 1984, he would escape the prison by hiding in the foliage of the island, and when the coast was clear, he would begin manufacturing a raft of logs and tie them using vines. He would miraculously make it to land north of the Ecuadorian border. This psychopathic killer was smart enough to navigate over 20 miles of open sea on a makeshift raft, and it's these type of people who are the most dangerous. Thus, Daniel would be the first and only prisoner to have ever escaped Gargona prison, and even then, the authorities would be none the wiser that he made it to shore, and figured that he was eaten by sharks. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. As soon as he got to Ecuador, he would make his way to the city of Guayaquil between December 5th or 6th, 1984, and he would lay low for about 2 weeks. He eventually made his way to Quevedo, another city in Ecuador, and on December 18th, 1984, Daniel would abduct another 9-year-old girl and have his way with her. The very next day, he struck again, this time with a 10-year-old girl. Between 1984 and 1986, Daniel would amass at least an additional 54 victims. It seemed that this vile beast was indulging and showed no signs of letting up. Daniel was a real sick individual and would prey on young girls who didn't have much wealth and would trick them into accompanying him to find some non-existent church. He would offer these girls a cash reward if they were willing to help him find what he was looking for, and would walk with them without raising suspicion. As soon as he had their trust, he would take a shortcut through the woods, claiming that he knew a faster way of getting where he was going, and the victims he was able to lure were met with a horrific demise. He would hack, slash, beat, and dismember his victims after he finished sexually gratifying himself, then would begin to look for his next kill. This went on until on February 25th, 1986, Daniel was approached by 2 policemen right after he had killed a 9-year-old girl named Elizabeth. The officers noticed Daniel was acting strange and suspicious and walked up to him to investigate. What they found on this person is truly sick: a bag with bloody clothes and a piece of the 9-year-old girl's body. Safe to say, they got him once again. When they were interrogating him, he would give a fake name but was eventually identified as the prisoner who escaped the prison island. So, Daniel would finally begin talking to authorities and giving them details about his abhorrent activity over the 2 years after he escaped, and admitted to killing at least 72 young girls. At this point, he was suspected of killing 72 to 180 young girls over the course of his serial killer rampage. Over the course of roughly 3 years, Daniel would lead investigators to the graves of his 72 victims in Ecuador, and they were finally laid to proper rest, and closure was given to the families of the victims. After word got out of the sheer devastation Daniel caused on these families, he would be dubbed the Sadist of Charquito. And on June 1986, Daniel, the Sadist of Charquito Camargo, was sentenced to 16 years in prison, which is the maximum sentence in Ecuador. Curiously, shortly after he committed his heinous acts, Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes, was also on a killing spree, and was said to have been trying to beat Daniel's record of 180 victims. They were even sent to the same prison, though they never interacted. I'll make sure to leave a link to his video in the description, but I digress. Daniel would only serve 5 years of his prison sentence because on November 13, 1994, he was stabbed to death by Giovanni Noguera, a fellow prisoner, who was coincidentally the nephew of one of Daniel's victims. You can't really serve your prison sentence if you're dead, am I right? And as the saying goes, revenge is a dish best served cold. So, in the grand scheme of things, Giovanni did the world a favor and got rid of the vile human known as Daniel Camargo. Daniel Camargo was an intelligent assailant who amounted to nothing but abhorrent behavior. Every bit of trouble he got into during his later years were attributed to the bad acting he would commit, but decided that he wasn't at fault and needed to enact his injustice on the weakest of victims, young girls. In any case, thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate every one of you. If you enjoy the content, please leave a comment, a like, and subscribe, as I'll be posting videos weekly so you can have something interesting to listen to. With that being said, take care and until next time.